Cassie, anything?
It's kind of related to some things you've been talking about. I guess brokenness. You said that Bisa kind of broke Irina open in a certain way, and that over time it was no longer mostly Irina, but more of him inside her, and talking about, the water and the rock. I just wonder if you could just talk more about that process and what happened to Irina, what happens to the rock, how it kind of becomes what it wasn't.
Do you know much about Carlos Castaneda?
Just very little.
So Castaneda is doing his PhD UCLA, and he wants to write his dissertation on certain plants or drugs. And so he goes to, I don't know, somewhere, and he runs into an old man. They're standing, Castaneda is standing with a friend of his at a train station or a bus station, and the friend says, well, that guy was sitting over there. He's old and ugly and wrinkly and almost dead. He knows a few things about the stuff that you're looking for or asking for, and Castaneda goes there and he talks relentlessly for about 3 hours, and he says that this old man didn't really say much. He just sat and listened. And when the bus arrived, the old man looks at Castaneda and says, well, it's good to have talked to you, even though you've done most of the talking. Gets on the bus and leaves. And Castaneda just sits there, dumbfounded, because he comes to notice that he was just rambling on and on and on for 3 hours. There was something about this man, this old man, that had captured Castaneda, but he didn't know what it was. Eventually, he figures out where this man lives. And Castaneda, when he arrives at this man's door, the old man says, well, I've been waiting for you. And the Yaqui Indians of Mexico, that's what this man, Don Juan, he used plants, drugs, to open up certain parts of the human being so that it could be open to certain experiences. And those experiences were intense enough and profound enough to create a lasting transformation, not just for a moment or two. And so Castaneda worked with him for a number of years. And there came a point Castaneda said, I just can't do this anymore. This man demands too much. And the things I'm experiencing and the things I'm beginning to learn, they are too much for me. I want to go back to my life. I just want to have a comfortable life. And he leaves him for about 3 years. But just because physically you're not there, it doesn't mean that you don't think about what has happened to you and how the relationship was with this man. 3 years later, he finds himself back at his door. He says, I'm here again. Some people have said, he just made up these stories. But I think even if Castaneda had made up all these stories, it takes really such a beautiful mind, such a beautiful imagination to kind of come up with these characters and scenarios that it's worth delving into and reading, even if it's fantasy. His teacher Don Juan dies. At the point of death, Castaneda begins to cry. He's like violently just weeping, and his teacher says to him, listen, these are like my last minutes. I have no idea what's waiting for me on the other side. Just let me go in peace. Let me be, okay? Stop crying like this. Grow up. Just be quiet. And then he dies. Don Juan. It's an interesting thing because he comes back to Los Angeles and various other places and forms his own groups. There is, as far as I know, there are only a handful of interviews of him. There are no videos of him. No one knows where he is or was. He's probably dead now, but he went underground. He only talked about these ideas and experiences to a very select group of people, and they were mostly women. In the 1950s and 60s, it's very difficult to get to a UC system. Then it's very difficult to get into their PhD program, and he was doing anthropology. And you have a kid who is near the finish line. All he needs to do is just his dissertation. That's all he needs to do. But because of this man and through this man, he has an experience or certain set of experiences that turn his life upside down. They get him really depressed, really frightened. He has to go back and make things right with 3 women in his life that he wronged in the past. These are ways you kind of make sacrifices. And I guess the way I'm trying to kind of respond to your question is that it seems that all these stories, or even if you were to read the story of Milarpa, it's a young kid who's working with this really, really mean old man. He's really, really mean. He cusses all the time. He beats this young kid all the time. And the wife of this old man looks at this young student and says, what is wrong with you? Leave. This guy is no good. He can't teach you anything. And the young kid tries, but he can't. There is something about this old man that keeps this young man near him, despite all the abuse, you have Irina, or you have Castaneda, or you have Melarpa. It doesn't really matter, who you want to pick. They run into someone. That someone has a certain mystery that lives inside him or her. Just to create gender equality these days, And so, for whatever the reasons are, Castaneda has an antenna that receives the messages from this old man. There are all these people. No one cares who this man is. No one knows who this man is. And even if they knew, they wouldn't really care for his craft. But there is something mysterious about Castaneda. There is something mysterious about Don Juan. And it's like these two incomplete bodies have found each other. And now they're trying to kind of create a union. And there's going to be a lot of friction. And you have to kind of read, what Castaneda says about this old man and how this old man treats him. You've gone to school, you think yourself to be educated, but you're an imbecile. You don't know anything. And the ways that this old man harasses and abuses and belittles, Castaneda is, when you read it, you kind of become very sad for this young man. He should just leave. Why are you taking so much abuse from this guy? Just go read a book, go read the Bible, and choose a different path. And it reminds me of the story of Aristophanes about, Zeus being really, really angry because human beings have 2 heads and 4 arms and 4 legs, and they become profoundly arrogant and they begin to worship each other or themselves as opposed to Zeus. So Zeus cuts them in half. And he says, as long as these 2 halves don't meet each other, they'll continue to worship me. But the moment they meet, gods are no longer there. They disappear. And I think this is one of the things that happens to all of us when we fall in love. Whether for the right or the wrong reasons, it doesn't matter. But the emotions are so intense, you feel as if this other person completes you, And I think it's the same thing with teacher-student relationship. That there is something about Castaneda that gets completed upon seeing Don Juan. And there is something about Don Juan that gets completed upon seeing Castaneda. The difference is this though. Because Don Juan is a seasoned teacher, and because he's at a stage where he accepts life the way it is, that he is okay with taking his wisdom to the grave. Okay? Castaneda is not there yet. His need for Don Juan is much more intense than Don Juan's need for Castaneda. It's an unequal relationship. There is always going to be abuse. Always going to be abuse. You will never, it's not like a Jesus Christ, I think he's kind of portrayed wrongly in the Gospels. If Jesus Christ is really a man of wisdom, you're not going to easily be able to just give wisdom to anybody. It doesn't work that way. I guess his real abuse is when Peter comes to him and Jesus looks at him and says, Satan lives inside you. Peter, you just need to leave me alone.
He does call them morons quite a lot.
Yeah, especially in the Gospel of Mark.
Yeah.
As long as that relationship remains intact, then Don Juan, has a chance of changing Castaneda inside and out. And I think he was very successful. Because you need to understand, Cassie, when you attain self-sufficiency to some extent, then you can be your own company. You can keep your own company when you can sit. And as Castaneda did, you can sit and just write book after book. Power is very intoxicating. And if you are new to power, you're going to use and abuse it. And I have no doubt that he did. Okay. But the fact that he chose to go on the ground and be invisible, that speaks volumes. That you truly realize the dangerousness of the mystery that lives inside you. And you want to protect people from being attracted to it for the wrong reasons. You know. All I know is in all these narratives with different people is that it seems that though on the surface their tradition may be different, their path may be different, but they all go through the same scenario. There is the attraction, there is the confusion, there is the loneliness, there is the anger, there is the desire to walk away, and perhaps even the walking away, coming to realize they can't stay away for too long, they go back. The idea of surrender, the idea of acceptance. You can't do any of those things unless you love someone intensely and deeply. You know. And if your question is, well, how does one fall in love in this way? I don't know. I don't think anyone knows. And if they say they do, I think they're lying. You know, it's one of the reasons I don't take, you know, all the people who work on SLOs and PLOs seriously. You know, because it's easy to give people information or data. It's just very difficult to take them on a journey so that they can truly understand what this data is all about. There was a guy who in India, University of Chicago, I think, he was doing his PhD dissertation in sociology. And he went to the chair of his department, of the sociology department, and his dean, and he said, I don't want to sit in my office and read books and write. I actually want to do something different. And when they asked him what it is, he said, I want to go in the projects. I want to go in them. And I want to penetrate. And I want to go see how people live there. And they say, look, this is not done. You can't do that. They'll kill you. And he says, I don't really care. I just don't want to do an armchair, you know, dissertation. I want to get dirty. And that's what he does. And the book is called Gang Leader for a Day, I think. And you know, he kind of just sits by the apartment buildings, and first people ask him, you know, what the hell are you doing here? Who are you? What's your business? What are your intentions? Then little by little he gets introduced to the inner circle until he meets the leader of, you know, this space. And he's told that you think that, you know, I give drugs to all these kids get on their bicycle, go to these rich neighborhoods, they sell the drugs, they come back here with the money, they give me the money, what do you think I do with it? And then they go to Costco together. He buys diapers and, you know, formula and food, and he gives them out to people. I think in learning anything, there is a great sacrifice to be made. And the only way that you can make sacrifices is when you love someone. You can't do it otherwise. It's impossible. You can't will yourself to sacrifice. Because when you love someone, you put a price tag, you know, on the things that you're wanting to sacrifice. And the value of the things you're sacrificing are always zero amount. Because you sacrifice to please the person that you love. Okay? The person that you love has a value of $100. The things that you have to sacrifice have the value of zero. It's not a problem for you. It becomes a problem when all of a sudden love disappears or love never existed. Then the sacrifices seem very, very, very great. You know, so when you read the story of Abraham in the Old Testament, Abraham is filled with doubts for a long time. If you read the same story in the Quran, Abraham has no doubts. He just walks and he's ready to sacrifice Ishmael. You know. It's a great question that you ask. I don't think I don't have an answer to it because there are too many mysterious components. And you know, just because you love it doesn't mean you don't doubt. In the same movie Stigmata, you know, when they're sitting in a coffee shop, he says the closer you get to God, the more powerful Satan becomes. And I think in some ways it's very, very, very true that the more you love and the more sacrifices you have to make, the emotions of doubt and fear and anger, they also kind of explode inside you, you know. You know, it's said that Shams could have possibly been killed by Rumi's son. I don't know if the story is true or not, but I'm thinking that, you know, you're a son, Rumi happens to be your father. You have looked upon your father as this great teacher that you love. He's always loved you. He's always carried you on his shoulders. Rumi has, you know, of his son. And all of a sudden this strange old man shows up to your school. And it's like your father no longer sees you. All the value you had, this old man has stolen. The son becomes very jealous, very angry. And you realize, well, jealousy and the emotions of jealousy and anger are really rooted in the son's love for the father that he has lost. So, you know, sometimes when you have all these emotions, you know, Castaneda's departure from Don Juan for 3 years, you know, in many ways his passion for the path, his love for this man had become unbearable. It was just too much. You know, I don't know if there's an SLO for that, where you can go to a classroom and say, well, today we're going to talk about how students should love their teachers. I'm talking about Peter and Jesus, or Castaneda and the Don one. I'm not talking about like Berkeley College. I don't know who's qualified to teach. We'll talk about those SLOs or PLOs, or who even dares to have such SLOs on the curriculum, but nevertheless.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
I don't know. Maybe. You know, if for the people who walk away for a time because it all becomes a little bit too much. I don't know, maybe you've already spoken about this when you talked about the prodigal son, but I wonder what it is that, that changes in that person, that they realize there's nothing else really meaningful out there, and they just go back in spite of the fear. I mean, what is it that, I guess, overcomes that fear that became so great?
You mean someone being there, then going away, then realizing that they need to go back? Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher, talks about his own experiences where he lived a life of pleasure. And it's fun. He would drink, he would smoke, he would bed women, men, not men, just women. And then there came a point where he just got bored. And then he tried to become an ethical human being, pay his taxes, go to church, be nice to his parents. Then he didn't find that very meaningful. Then he became religious. And he was an introvert. He was very creative. He loved the Socrates. He was also lucky enough to have been born during the age of the machines, where society, life was beginning to change. The way people perceived religion was changing. And so, while being religious, he came to realize it's just too much. He can't do it. He can't make himself into a sacrificial lamb on a daily basis. The weight is just crushing him. He couldn't go back to simply being a nice guy. He went back to the life of pleasure. If initially he began his life in the world of pleasure and he was drinking moderately, now he was getting drunk every night. If before he was bedding like 5 women a day, now he was bedding 25 women. And it wasn't because he enjoyed those things, but it was a way for him to, I suppose, just forget everything about God, everything about having found the cross and carrying it. He didn't want that cross anymore, and he wanted to do whatever he possibly could to forget it. He just couldn't. He tried. He did his best to forget, all of his experiences and feelings while he was in this third stage of life, the religious life, but he just couldn't. And eventually he gave up the aesthetic life and went back full force to the religious life. And, I honestly don't know there are a couple of things. Temperament is immensely important. You will never find someone like Auspinski ever desiring to go back to Gurdjieff. Maybe once in a while you have this fantasy about going back, but physically you will never do it because you have too much pride and arrogance inside you. Introverts are interesting people. Introverts like Jesus Christ, introverts like Kierkegaard. Because as an introvert, there is something inside you that's always broken. You're just born broken. That's the problem with introverts, with the feelers. Thinkers are very, very different. Thinkers have a good amount of control because they get a lot of information. They try to dissect an animal, figure out what goes where. Feelers enjoy chaos. One of the things that happened in the 18th and 19th century was that there was this conflict between the Romantics and the people of the reason, the Enlightenment age. The Romantics argued, you guys have just messed up. You've made a mess of this world. It's turned into a machine. If there was any spirit in it, it's been sucked out. And they try to breathe the spirit of life back into life, And you can kind of recognize introverts. Their physical bodies are shaped very, very uniquely. The way they speak, the way they think, everything about them is very unique as opposed to the extroverts. So that's one of the things about Kierkegaard, Unless you happen to be an extrovert and you run into someone like Bai Sahib or Don Juan, and in some strange way they really make you understand that life, physical life, the world of Caesar, has nothing to offer you. I don't know how that's done. Where in a 2-3 year period, the interactions are so intense that you, despite wanting control, that's what an extrovert does, an intellectual, for example, that you begin to understand, or feel that you have no power over anything. And that's devastating, that's horrifying for you, because Auspinski eventually went back and reclaimed his identity. Someone like J.G. Bennett couldn't. Okay. I think whenever you ask questions about that contains these mysterious components, how do you run into a teacher? How do you recognize a teacher? How do you recognize a student? How is wisdom given to someone? How is wisdom received? At what stage does the prodigal son who lives his life in waste come to realize that it is in fact wasteful and goes back to Father. I don't know how those things happen, you know. I really think that those things are they just need to be left alone. You know, it's Justice Scalia, was it? Supreme Court? Scalia, was his name?
Scalia?
Scalia, yeah. You know, he said something interesting. He was asked if he could define what pornography was.
Oh.
And he said, I can't really tell you what pornography is, but I know what pornography is when I see it. You know, and I think it's a great distinction that yeah. I have no idea how teachers are made, how students are made, how one falls in love, how one walks away or why one walks away, why one walks back, when understanding comes about. I think if those things were clear and easy enough to be understood, tricksters such as Socrates and Jesus and Moses and Muhammad would have, but they were complete failures too.